Good afternoon. The Senate Finance Committee is now in session. I will quickly go down the list of the bills that need a full hearing, and we will be hearing those first, and later we'll hear several that will need sponsor-only hearings. So the first bill that we're going to hear this afternoon is House Bill 221, Delegate Turner. And we are then going to House Bill 853, House Bill 768, House Bill 1211, and House Bill 41. When we're done with those bills that need full hearings, we will then hear from those that are sponsor only and require less time and less information. So at this time, we'll start with with Delegate Turner's bill. And let me say that we will give the sponsors whatever time for these full hearings that the sponsors need to lay out the parameters of their bill. For these 5 that have a full hearing, we will allow whoever is their chief proponent up to 5 minutes to testify if they need that amount of time. And then all other witnesses will testify for a maximum of 2.5 minutes each. So Delegate Turner, you're up next. Motor vehicle insurance, use of credit history, and rating policies. And Chairman Davis is going to present the bill. And welcome to you, Mr. Chair.
I don't think he's here.
Is he here yet?
I don't think he's here.
Well, then we can move on and we'll come back to that one. Why don't we go then to 768, Delegate Chakotyan.
853.
All right, Senate Bill.
853.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
House Bill 853.
All right, instead we're going to House Bill 853.
Okay.
All right, and Secretary Schultz will be presenting.
Great, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Vice Chair Feldman. I very much appreciate being here today. For the record, I am Kelly Schultz, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce, and I'm testifying in support of House Bill 853. I am joined by 2 fabulous colleagues of mine at the department, Andy Fish and Darla Garrett, who are available to answer questions. Madam Chair, if anyone from the committee has a question that I cannot address. This is a departmental bill that makes some alterations to our small minority and women-owned business account. We also know it here as the VLT program. We feel these changes will make the program better, able to assist small businesses after a disaster or during a sudden crisis, like we just had with the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to note right away that the bill has no fiscal impact and does not increase the program's annual appropriation. Currently, the VLT program uses a portion of video lottery terminal revenue from the state's casinos to provide investment capital and loans to small minority and women-owned businesses. However, the number of incidents in recent years, including the flood in Ellicott City in 2016 and 2018, have shown that businesses in need of quick capital are reluctant to take on additional debt. Furthermore, when the pandemic hit last March, we at Commerce found that statutory limitations on some of our existing programs kept us from being able to deploy funds from those programs as quickly as we possibly could. We were able to work with our fund managers to establish flexible lending terms, and we also created our emergency small business grant and loan programs. But as you know, it took us some time to get those up and running. We certainly hope that we never have to face a situation like this again, but if we do, we want to do better and have more assistance readily available to our small and minority businesses, which are particularly vulnerable in a crisis. House Bill 853 expands the capabilities of the VLT program so that if a state of emergency is declared at either the federal or state level, our fund managers would be able to offer financial assistance in the form of a grant, which, as you know, would not have to be repaid, or would be able to convert some of their VLT loans to a grant. which would then reduce the debt burden on a business. The total amount of a grant or loan converted to a grant would not exceed $50,000 for a single business. As drafted, the total amount of assistance the program can provide as grants during the state of emergency could not exceed $2.5 million in one fiscal year. Commerce is proposing an amendment to this to increase this amount to $10 million. So that may be a change as to what the bill says. This would allow the full amount of funding provided through the Relief Act that was just, as you know, recently passed by all of you. Thank you very much. So that we could potentially be provided as grants or loans converted to grants. They do want to note, however, that this would not require the fund managers to offer grants, but simply give them more funding options to assist small businesses in their communities during an emergency. This will give Commerce some flexibility that we lacked when we were providing relief to businesses impacted by COVID-19 last year. And it will help businesses by giving them a new source of assistance that doesn't require them to take on debt. Governor Hogan has already sought to eliminate debt for small businesses who accepted emergency relief loans, as you remember during the pandemic. He converted $75 million in small business loans to grants at the end of 2020. And the Relief Act includes a provision that would allow Commerce to forgive emergency loans issued through our MSBDFA program, which is another of our key small business assistance tools. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank everybody here, as I said, for everything that you had done in order to be able to work on that bipartisan level with the administration on the Relief Act. House Bill 853, what we're here today, extends the same idea to our VLT program. This is a good bill for Maryland's small businesses and their employees, and it's a good bill for Maryland's economy. It will help businesses on and the doors open after a sudden disaster or crisis. We wanted to save one final and likely most important issue regarding this bill for the last, as we have begun putting in place an implementation plan for the Recovery Now funds included in the Relief Act. We have become concerned that we will not be able to get the additional funding provided for this program out to the businesses in need fast enough. As I mentioned previously, our experience over the last 11 months has shown that businesses are not willing to take on more debt at this time, regardless of the extent of their need. The bill was amended in the House to be emergency legislation. That way, if it is the will of this committee and the General Assembly as a whole to pass this bill, it can become effective immediately, and our fund managers can begin getting funding provided through the Recovery Now Fund to businesses in need as quickly as possible. And with all of that, members of the committee, we respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 853.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. And members, if you have questions, the Secretary has some technical advisors with her from the Department of Commerce to help answer. So are there any questions?
Madam Chair, not really questions, but as you all know, I had a bill earlier today, and once I learned about what the Secretary and our team had put together, I withdrew that bill because I think it's definitely in the right step and providing an opportunity for so many of our small and minority businesses that really need help during this pandemic. And so thank you for your presentation today, Madam Secretary, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Are there any other questions? All right, well, thanks for an excellent presentation and for something that I'm sure is welcomed by all members of the General Assembly and will be by the citizens of Maryland, and especially the small minority and women-owned businesses in Maryland. And that ends the testimony on this very good bill. Thank you. All right, I see that Chairman Davis has arrived, so we'll go back and do that bill. Just a minute. Okay. Okay, so House Bill 221. And Mr. Chair, you have whatever time you need to lay out the parameters of the bill and to educate us. And then others, whoever you might want to designate, if you haven't, as the lead proponent, get up to 5 minutes, and everyone else not more than 2.5 minutes each.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I certainly appreciate it. This isn't going to be long. You guys know this bill, have heard it many times. As introduced the subject matter, you've heard it many times. I'm going to also have written testimonies submitted. I'm just going to go basically to the highlight of what I did to the bill. I'm sorry for Delegate Veronica Turner today. The bill as amended was a bill, or the amendment was an agreement, if you will, that I worked out with the insurance industry. And it's called Extraordinary Life Circumstances. In a nutshell, this has been going on for 2 decades, whether or not credit should be used as a consideration when we're doing auto insurance. And a number of us in both chambers have had some concerns and issues with that. But time and again, for reasons I think are legitimate or things that we need to be concerned about. For example, as much as eliminating credit would help a certain segment of the population, if the things that have been testified to previously, there's a rather significant discount that's been offered to those who do have good credit. So in our quest to help those who need it, we could potentially be hurting those who who are doing well, but nevertheless need that assistance. And so I was talking to a number of folks in the industry, and, we've gone back and forth about that, and we've had some spirited debate. But they mentioned this model legislation to me that comes from NCOIL, and it talks about extraordinary life circumstances. And in a nutshell, it's about 8 or 9 things that fit in there. Whether it's a catastrophic event declared by the federal or state government, a serious illness or injury, or serious illness or injury to an immediate family member, death of a spouse, child, or parent, divorce, temporary loss of employment, military deployment overseas, and other events. And the reason why that got my attention is because those are the kinds of things that can cause you to have bad credit. Certainly, in a pandemic and folks are losing their jobs or laid off and so forth, that can cause someone to have bad credit through no fault of their own. And as a result, when they go for a new, if they're going to a new company, that would be one of those considerations. So I work with the industry on that, and I felt to move the ball forward, we should at least, try this. Let's give this a try and see if this will help in those circumstances. But there will be those that come and they, I've talked to some and they've trashed the approach, and, Madam Chair, and maybe I got a kick out of it. They were telling me, about the effects of Black and brown people. And, they almost had me forgetting that I was one of those people. That, I know a little something about Black and brown people myself. I've been for nearly 54 years and have represented them for 27 years. So I know a little something about that. And more importantly, I think after 27 years down here, I have a pretty good idea of what can pass and what can't. And that sometimes, a half a loaf, is better than no loaf. And you have to try different things. You have to work with folks to get there. Talk of, oh, this is wasted political capital. I don't know. I don't want to take up any more of the committee's time. I just wanted you all to understand why I took this approach. I just didn't see how, we were going to keep wasting time year after year. And maybe if we tried some other things that we're told that could be helpful, we can see. And ultimately, the General Assembly meets every year. If some point in the future we need to revisit that issue, we can. But to simply trash any other approach other than full repeal when we know potentially what the consequences could be, I thought wasn't the right thing to do. So I am done. That was longer than I thought, but I certainly appreciate you all's time.
Okay, I'm sure there probably are some questions. Are there any questions? Senator Kramer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Not so much a question, but a statement. I wanted to share with Chairman Davis just how much I miss him and his wisdom. And that statement has nothing to do with the fact that I'll be in his committee an hour from now with a couple of bills that I have. I just wanted to share that with him, Madam Chair.
We miss you, sir.
Okay. Are there questions from any other members? Okay, well, let me just ask one,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman. If you had to succinctly tell us how this bill responds to effectively the situation that you're concerned about and that many of us are concerned about, what would you say?
I guess what I would say is this, and one of the things Delegate Turner had initially put in was that the bill would, or as she would have it amended, it would for 2 years suspend credit because of COVID. That was one of the things she was concerned about as well, the impact of COVID on the financial ramifications on the citizenry. So when we started talking about this particular point and the catastrophic or the extraordinary life circumstances, and one of the first thing I mentioned was the catastrophic event as declared by a state or federal government, I think it addresses that particular point. Again, I know that there are folks that think anything less than a full repeal of credit is insufficient. I just didn't see that happening. And when they told me, well, we can come back next year. Well, we came back last year and the year before. So that's just that whole mouse thing of running in circles. I think this, if nothing else, it provides a different way or a different opportunity to see if we can accomplish the same objective. And it may not work. I readily admit that, but at least, we are trying something as opposed to just spinning our wheels.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more questions, then that ends the testimony on House Bill 221. And
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Okay. All right. We're going next to House Bill 768, the Montgomery County Delegation Bill, Montgomery County Community Choice Energy Pilot Program, MC 7-21. And all right, Delegate Charkoudian is here too.
I'm here.
Okay. Delegate, you can take the time that you need to lay out the parameters of the bill. And if there is a lead sponsor, a proponent, well, I don't see one designated. So everyone else will have 2.5 minutes each.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here presenting House Bill 768 on behalf of the Montgomery County delegation. This is a local bill. It's a Montgomery County bill. It establishes a pilot community choice energy program in Montgomery County with an opportunity for the entire state to benefit from the studies and the research and the work that the PSC will do and a work group will do so that the whole state can learn from this experience and then decide whether it's appropriate to expand it to the rest of the state, close it down altogether, or do something in between. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what community choice energy is. First, let me say thank you. Senator Bidel, of course, had the bill last year, and so you probably learned a little bit about it at that time. And thank you, Senator, for cross-filing it that year. It's exciting that we've continued to make progress on this, and now we have it here as this pilot. I'll just quickly review what it is and then address some of the issues that have come up around it and answer some questions. So what community choice energy does is it allows a government to basically do bulk purchase on behalf of residents. Community choice energy has been around for about 25 years. And right now there's 9 states that authorize and allow for community choice energy. And I just want to share those states with you. They are Illinois, Ohio, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, California, Rhode Island, Virginia, and New Hampshire. So you sort of hear a mix of states with different sets of values around their energy policy, all of whom authorize community choice energy. And so we've really had a chance by looking at these different states, what their successes have been, what their challenges have been. We've had a chance to build this bill with sort of the best of all worlds. And I'll explain how it works. So when a government has an opportunity to purchase energy on behalf of residents, they're sort of doing this bulk purchasing, and it allows for, similar to the way that large commercial businesses are able to do bulk purchasing, it allows for lower cost energy for residents. And it also allows for more clean energy. And if you look across the country at these 9 states, you'll see there's a mix. Some of them have prioritized primarily getting the lowest cost possible. Others have prioritized getting the most green energy possible. Others have prioritized getting the most locally generated clean energy as possible for local economic development. And then others have really done a mix of the two. So they've gotten the most clean energy possible at the lowest possible price. And so we've seen some real successes of this approach around the country. I also want to say, just when we're trying to sort of put this in context, is that in Maryland right now, while we don't have community choice energy authorized, we do have several municipal electric companies. And so this idea of government purchasing energy on behalf of residents, those electric companies, they also own their own poles and wires, which a CCE wouldn't. But that idea that a government can make those decisions on behalf of residents, we already in Maryland have a little bit of a precedent for that, I would say. So in the case of a community choice energy, you would have Pepco, BG&E would still maintain poles and wires, but you would have, in this case, Montgomery County government making the decisions about the actual purchasing of energy. And I think you'll hear in a few moments from Montgomery County executive, the reason that the county is interested in being able to pursue this is because the climate has, the county has declared a climate emergency, and this would support the county to be able to reach its climate goals. Of course, there's other counties who have expressed interest in this, and I think they're eagerly awaiting Montgomery County's experience to then decide. And I've certainly heard from Anne Arundel, from Frederick, from other counties, and the county executive may be able to share more about that. So what the bill does is it establishes the CCE as the default service that customers can opt out of if they choose to. So right now, you have Pepco, you have BG&E, you have Potomac Edison. If you do nothing right now, Pepco buys your energy for you. And roughly 15 to 20% of Maryland residents pick something else. They pick Direct Energy, they picked NRG, they pick some other retail supplier, Clean Choice. And the other 80 to 85% generally do nothing. And so they get their energy purchased by their default provider, the utility. What would happen now if Montgomery County went forward with a CCE is that if a customer did nothing, they would have the CCE purchase their energy for them. But they still have all the choices that they currently have. So they could still pick NRG, they could still pick Direct, they could still pick Clean Choice, they could still pick the myriad of other choices that are out there for all of the residents in Maryland. And if they chose to, they could also go back and pick standard offer service from Pepco. So what this does is it adds another choice to all of the possibilities, and it establishes a new opt-out. And that opt-out is crucial because that is what allows the CCE to do the bulk purchasing that lowers the prices for residents, which is the primary goal. Want to just highlight a couple things. As I mentioned, because we have all these other states that have it, I have over the last 3 years spent done extensive research on sort of the best practices and best models out there. I've worked closely with the Public Service Commission, with the Office of People's Counsel, who you'll hear from in a moment. They're very supportive of community choice energy. I've also worked very closely with the utilities in the state, with Pepco, with BG&E, with the other Exelon companies. They had been opposed in the past. They're now neutral on the bill. So I feel like we've addressed really the vast majority of concerns, and we've got a lot of technical fixes in the bill for all of the potential concerns folks might raise. We have a number of consumer protections in the bill, and we also have the Public Service Commission directed to establish regulations that provide additional consumer protections. And the protections in the bill are both for people within the community choice energy, as well as for those who are not in a community choice energy. So we've set it up to make sure that whatever happens in Montgomery County, nobody outside of Montgomery County is affected by that. So there had been some questions last year of if Montgomery County comes out of Pepco, out of BG&E, what happens to everybody else? Essentially nothing happens to everybody else. So, and while the bill is designed to help Montgomery County reach climate goals and lower energy prices, nobody else is affected by that. Now, I'd like to take a few moments to speak to the opposition. And I want to start by talking about the opposition that suggests that this minimizes choice or diminishes choice for residents of Montgomery County. And I want to remind you of your 7th grade, 8th grade math. X plus 1 is always greater than X. Would you agree with me? So here's the deal. We now have however many choices out there, 80 suppliers, 250 suppliers, whatever it is. There's also Pepco and there's CCE. Now you add CCE, you have 81 choices, 251 choices. So none of the choices are taken away from Montgomery County residents. So I've struggled to understand when you're hearing from the opposition, I've struggled to understand why they're saying it diminishes choice. It is an opt-out, but it doesn't take any choice away. And because there's no exit fees, at any point in time, any resident of Montgomery County can pick any of these other companies if they offer a competitive price. And that gets me to what I believe is the real reason that retail suppliers are fighting this bill. And that is this: they know that this is going to be successful. They know, because they've seen around the country, that CCE will bring down the price. And so what their concern is that they won't be able to provide prices that are competitive with what the CCE is going to be able to offer. And in fact, when I met with members of the retail supply community, one of them said, I said to them, I don't understand why you're fighting this. You have the opportunity to get these contracts. Why wouldn't you want an opportunity to get a contract for all of Montgomery County? And what they said was, this person said to me, the problem with CCEs is the prices come down so low, it's hard for us to make a profit at those rates. So what they're saying is, CCEs allow the promise of competitive markets to actually be fulfilled. They bring prices down for consumers. The reason we support competitive markets is to lower prices for consumers. So if the retail suppliers are afraid of that, we need to ask, really, was our goal to lower prices for consumers or to guarantee the profits for those companies? And I think it was the former. And so we have that opportunity to do that now with the CCE. A couple other things that I want to highlight. The opposition is going to highlight something related to the ownership of generation. I just want to make sure that folks are clear. We're talking about solar panels on a landfill. We're talking about school buses that are electric school buses that can be used to also charge the grid. We're not talking about building a gas-fired power plant or a wind farm in Montgomery County. And most importantly, the bill establishes regulations for the Public Service Commission so that there'll be a plan. Any generation that's owned, or even any contracts that are signed, they'll be bonded. There'll be plans for transition should the CCE end. There will be a plan for transition of those assets or of those contracts. The last thing that I just want to highlight, when you hear opposition, specifically retail suppliers, talking about that they're worried about consumers, I would just want to point you to the groups whose job it is to be worried about consumers, the nonprofit, the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, the Attorney General's office support the bill. And the Office of People's Counsel, the office that we have authorized to protect consumers in this state, is about to tell you why they support the bill. So I think I would suggest that those are the people who speak up for consumers, and that's who we should listen to as consumers. So in closing, I just want to say that really it's been an honor to work on this bill over the last 3 years. I feel like the number of conversations I've been able to have with opposition, with folks who used to be opposed and now support, with supporters, with other colleagues such as yourselves, has really made this a stronger bill. So I really appreciate the opportunities that we've had to have these conversations. And so now I think you have in front of you a very strong bill. And I think that you have an opportunity to move this forward as a pilot in the state, to join these 9 other states that have authorized it. And it's an exciting time, because I think once we get this pilot started, we'll be able to learn from it and figure out what other opportunities there are related to this for the rest of the state as well. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We do have 5 members who've already indicated they have questions, and we're going to them. But before, I'd just like to know, is there any municipality or county in Maryland that is so small that it wouldn't work for them? Let's say we were looking at the county of Kent. I think it has what, about 8,000 people.
So, well, this bill right now it only would authorize Montgomery County to do it. So your question about like, is there a small municipality that couldn't do it? The bill doesn't allow for those municipalities to do it anyways. So the bill only authorizes Montgomery County as a pilot. But should we expand it sometime in the future? That may be what you're asking. I would say, the short answer is no. Across the country, you see some very small municipalities engaging in CCEs, and you see much larger counties and municipalities engaging in CCEs. So any size could theoretically do it. The larger the group that's doing the purchasing, the better the pricing they could probably get. So you might see some of the smaller municipalities joining with other municipalities, as has happened in New York, for example, where you have 8 or 9 municipalities together creating a CCE. So this bill right now only authorizes Montgomery County, but should we expand, I would say even smaller municipalities in the state could benefit from it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll start with Vice Chair Feldman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just Delegate Charkouti, just starting with kind of a real basic issue here about, this is a local bill for Montgomery County pilot project. So you indicated earlier, from where you sit, this has no ratepayer impact on counties or jurisdictions outside of Montgomery. I just want to make that point clear. Could you just reiterate that point? Because there's some question about whether the committee should treat this as a local bill. But you got to start with that most basic point. So could you sort of explain to the committee very quickly?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And so I think we'll talk a little bit about how standard offer service works. The way standard offer service works is that the utilities purchase every 6 months. They purchase on 2-year contracts a quarter of the load for the entire body that they are purchasing for. And so in the case of, let's talk about Pepco, because that's potentially the one that you might be referring to. So Pepco buys energy for Montgomery and Prince George's County primarily. There's funny lines, but basically that's what the energy for. And they buy them in essentially 50 megawatt bundles. So right now it's about 10 50 megawatt bundles that they purchase every 6 months. And the pricing is based on that 50 megawatt bundle. So whether you buy, it's like if you go to Costco and you buy 50 toilet paper rolls, if you buy 10 things of 50 toilet paper rolls or 5 things of 50 toilet paper rolls, the price per toilet paper roll is the same. So if Pepco was buying 10 50 megawatt bundles and now they're only buying 5 50 megawatt bundles, the price doesn't go up for each megawatt because it's in that 50 megawatt bundle that the pricing auction happens. So that's the first thing. I think that sometimes there's confusion. There's a sense that the utility is sort of buying, and if you have some people leave, then other people's prices will go up. The second thing, though, is there was a concern that if you take people all at once out of that group, that you could have stranded costs for those contracts that were already signed. And so what you'll see is there's a section of the bill that tells the Public Service Commission to basically transition people in Montgomery County off of SOS in 6-month transition roughly 25% every 6 months. And so that's precisely timed to make sure that the standard offer service doesn't have any stranded contracts from an SOS auction. And then the last thing is there was a question about if people who were, if you have all of the sort of unpaid bills right now, that's spread out across everybody in the Pepco territory. And if you have that spread across only half the people in the Pepco territory, would the price go up or down? Everyone that I spoke to has suggested, Office of People's Counsel, Public Service Commission has suggested that that would not be the case. But we do have a section again in the bill that authorizes the Public Service Commission, if they see that happening. So if, for example, prices were going up in the areas outside of Montgomery County because of this, Public Service Commission is authorized to spread the cost over everybody. So what we've basically done is taken all of the different ways, even though there's no sort of proof that these things would harm customers outside of Montgomery County, we've taken all the ways that they could possibly affect those customers, and we've built in protections directly in the bill. And then we've also directed the Public Service Commission to keep an eye on those very same things to make sure that there's no way that people outside could be harmed by this effort within Montgomery County.
And Madam Chair,
Thank
just
you.
quickly follow. So ratepayer impact limited to Montgomery, as you just explained. So just to be clear, our Montgomery County House delegation, did they take a formal vote on this bill on the House side?
Well, the
House
House
del-
delegation
Montgomery
has
County.
unanimous, the
Right.
Senate's unanimous, the Montgomery County Council unanimously supports it. The executive's about to speak, and several of the municipalities in Montgomery County have sent letters of support. So essentially, every elected official in Montgomery County is behind this bill.
And Delegate Charkoudian, even with that, this will still have to go through a process in Montgomery County, right? This is only enabling in nature. So the county council will, and the county executive will have to have, I assume, some public hearings at the local level to vet some of these same subjects. I just want to make sure I understand how this will work process-wise if this bill were to pass.
That's correct, but actually, if I could just back up. So if the bill passes, the first thing that has to happen is the Public Service Commission has to go through a rulemaking process. And there's a stakeholder group that's established to get perspectives of multiple stakeholders in this bill. So first, the PSC would go through their rate-making process, their rulemaking process. After they go through all of that, which is a public process, which would also have additional participation, then, because it is just authorizing, then the county council would have to go through a public process to decide if they wanted to go forward and to decide the details of how they want to go forward. After they go through all that, then they would establish the actual CCE, which would be a pilot.
Okay, so this is a fairly long process that only starts now. There's a lot of other checks and balances and things along the way, including a pretty significant role for our Public Service Commission, as you say, to make sure there's not impacts outside of Montgomery, et cetera. Madam Chair, I just wanted to get those clarifying points out for the record, but thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Bottle.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Delegate Charkoudian. It's nice to see you again. Just have a couple of questions since this bill is a little different than last year's bill. Is this for the entire county at one time? It would end up under one contract, or would it be different municipalities within the county?
So the entire county would be part of the CCE. All the counties would also be part within that CCE. So you wouldn't have individual municipalities also as their own CCE. It would be the whole county. But in terms of a contract, you said, would it all be on the same contract? It'd all be on the same CCE. My guess is you would end up with multiple contracts, at least initially, because of the issue of you're pulling people out of SOS 1 quarter at a time. So you'd probably have multiple different contracts that are actually providing electricity, but it would be one CCE covering everybody in the county.
With one provider then?
No, that's what I'm saying. It could be one provider or it could be multiple providers, because at least initially you would have, because of the pulling people off of SOS 1 quarter every 6 months, right at the beginning. Because of that, you would at the very least have 4 different contracts initially. Now, when you bid those contracts out, you could have one provider win all 4, or you could have 4 different providers. But the county, I think, would be in a position to determine if they wanted, multiple contracts or one contract. There's nothing in the bill. I mean, their goal would be to lower the cost and to increase the green energy. So they'll speak to that in a moment. But in fact, there could be a value to having multiple providers in that mix, spreading the risk and so on. But that's not, the bill itself doesn't speak to whether it has to be one provider or multiple providers.
It's just your county is so large. I think you're the most populated county in the state. So it's at 1.2 million people.
That's right.
It's huge for a pilot program, but just a comment. So will it be guaranteed that the rate will never be more than the SOS?
So you can't actually guarantee that. The way that it's written is that the county has to establish a plan. Like no one can guarantee that, just because we can't even the utilities can't guarantee what the SOS will be. So what happens is, the way it's written is that the county has to submit a plan to the Public Service Commission for how they expect the CCE to save to save money for ratepayers. And so essentially the expectation is they're saving money compared to SOS, but and they would have to, sort of show how they intend to do that. But you can't guarantee it just because with energy prices, you can't guarantee anything, right? But it is designed so that it would have to, over time, be saving ratepayers money.
The reason I asked that is we had a bill in our committee this year. You may have had it in your committee also, about energy assistance. If people were on energy assistance, they can't pay more than the SOS. So that's why I asked the question, how will that work with the clients that are on energy assistance?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that I've thought about that a little bit. I think that what you might have then is that the county would have to have a plan for if there were periods where it were above SOS. So like I have a 100% green energy, right? Third party supplier. And about half the time my rates are below SOS and half the time they're above. But over time, it's about competitive with SOS. And so I think what you would have to do is within the CCE, you would have to work something out with the Office of People's Counsel and PSC to say, if on average they're paying essentially the same rate, is that sufficient? Or would the county have to make up the difference some kind of a way if it were higher for a period of time, right?
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Delegate. I don't want to say good to see this bill back again, but certainly interesting. And I do appreciate that it is more focused on Montgomery County, as the Vice Chairman made sure that we all understood in his comments. But I do want to understand how this works a little bit more. Just first of all, I can't kind of get away from the title, community choice. But yet this really isn't community choice because in a sense, this is an opt-out rather than an opt-in. Why was that change made?
To call it community choice?
To make it an opt-out rather than an opt-in.
Understood. Well, so community choice energy, it's also called community choice aggregation. Different states use a different term. It's always an opt-out. That is the model. And the reason for that is because it is the way that you get the vast majority of people in there to get the lowest possible price. And so we've had a chance right now already. We have opt-in in this state. And in fact, in Tacoma Park, which is where I was just saying, I have 100% clean energy. It's an opt-in. So the city was able to negotiate. They got about 10-15% of folks opting in. And they were able to get a pretty competitive price. It's 100% clean and it hovers close to SOS. Sometimes I'm 0.05 cents higher, sometimes 0.05 cents lower. So it's a decent price for an opt-in. The idea is if you could get everybody in that or 80% of folks in that, you'd be able to save a lot more. And I think that to your point about it is called community choice, it's not called individual choice. It doesn't stop individual choice, but it's not promoting specifically individual choice. It's promoting the community as a whole coming together and making a choice and benefiting from that bulk purchasing that the community is able to do through its elected officials on behalf of the community. But individuals still have every choice that they currently have. I mean, there's no choice that's taken away from anybody. Right now, people who do nothing are in PEPCO. They didn't choose that. They're in it. Now they elected people who chose another supply and they're getting this and they still can choose any of these other 80, 90, 250 suppliers if they want to do that.
Right, but the difference with the PEPCO or being on SOS is they're not, ulterior or other motives other than just, being in a competitive environment purchasing energy. You had mentioned a number of times that this procurement from the county could be related to goals, right? So low cost might not be the goal of the community's representatives in choosing the best electricity to purchase, right?
Well, so there's sort of two answers to that. Lowest cost may not be the only goal, but to Senator Beidel's question, low cost has to be a goal, like by statute, because it has to show that over time it's saving money for people. So low cost does have to be a goal. Lowest cost doesn't have to be the only goal.
And how is that determined? Because what I'm concerned is is, let's say you've acquired all these customers now. They have to make an affirmative action to get out of this, correct? They either have to notify or they have to go to a third party and provide, I guess, a contract to somebody, but they have to make an affirmative action to get out of this. What happens if the goals become more so than lower cost or lowest cost, and you get a number of community subscribers that want to be out all at the same time? Is that going to hurt the program?
Well, I mean, it'll affect the program, but certainly those are the things that have to be considered in establishing the, in the setting up of the structure of the program and in establishing the contracts that are associated with the program.
Okay, so
I think,
when you talk about,
it might be, sorry.
well, I want to get
Were
to
you
the
gonna
how it's actually implemented anyway. So the county, we give this authority to the county. You said they go through the process, they elect that they want to do that. What's the next step? I mean, you kind of look at the bill and you look at, some of the testimony, and you wonder really who's kind of the driving force behind wanting to go to this. But let's say that they do what I keep hearing, is that they go to some type of consultant or some type of a broker that then manages the procurement process. Is that what happens, or does the county just have in-house staff that decides that they're going to be energy procurement experts and go forward with that way?
Yeah, I think, well, that's up to the county. My guess is that they would end up working with a broker or with consultants who would sort of help design the program. That's really what happens in a lot of the other states. So that's my guess, but it would really be up to them.
So what I'm hearing about these brokers, again, I mean, you mentioned a number of states that were involved, that have this already. A number of states that got in early were as a result of the Enron activities, right? Massachusetts got in, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. A lot of the Enron activity got them to be in. One of the most recent to get in was New York. And I understand that they're having severe problems and now looking for legislation that would regulate these brokers, because right now these brokers aren't regulated by anybody, are they?
I'm not sure which brokers you're referring to. So like,
I'm talking about the consultants or whoever the county will have on procuring energy on their behalf.
So for example, in Massachusetts, I'll just take my hometown of Newton, Massachusetts, where they contracted with Direct Energy, and Direct Energy sort of has the contract and manages the CC. So Direct Energy as a third-party supplier is regulated. And in fact is now owned by NRG, which is why it's beyond me why NRG is fighting this, because they have like 2/3 of the CCEs in the country now that they own Direct Energy. But so there are regulations in place, and I think we actually have established more regulations in place in Maryland that would govern the CCE and thus govern the broker than there are anywhere else in the country, because we sort of looked at what were the advantages and disadvantages in all the different models that were out there. And in fact, I mean, so here's a way to think about it potentially that might answer your question. Last year, you had a bill that took the Choptank out from being regulated by the Public Service Commission. And I think that your thought process on that is Choptank is managed by its owner. So they elect the board of directors, and then they manage the company. This is an example of the folks who are elected making energy decisions on behalf of people, except this is regulated by the Public Service Commission. And so I think if you feel comfortable generally with the ideas of elected officials, elected people making decisions related to energy on behalf of the residents who are receiving the energy, I think if you're kind of generally comfortable with that concept, which I am, and I am for co-ops, then you would support this. And then on top of it, you have multiple public service regulations in place in this bill, which, I don't want to debate your bill, but I'm just saying there's sort of similar, except there's more regulations in this. If you're worried about regulations, we've got multiple ones in this bill.
Well, I'm not sure comparing an electric co-op to the Montgomery County government is the same. You know, I mean, this a co-op has the capability of running an electric company and has done so for a period of time. This is very new, and all of a sudden you're asking, the county government to be the procurement experts of energy on behalf of all of their citizens. Let me ask a quick question, because you brought up where you does your current city where you are now, Takoma Park, do they have they do municipal aggregation?
No, they're not allowed to, because our laws don't allow that. They have a opt-in. This was my point about when people have said, why don't we try an opt-in first? We've tried opt-in. There is opt-in. You can do opt-in now if you want. And so Takoma Park has attempted to do an opt-in. They've got about 10-15% of folks opted in. Right. And so they've gotten a decent price at that. But this is why I believe it's probably possible to get a really good price at quite a bit of clean energy, is because even with a small number of people, we've got 100% clean energy that's competitive with SOS. So I believe with a lot of people, we can get very close to 100.
Would this supersede that, since Takoma Park is in Montgomery County?
It would, and the city of Takoma Park is 100% in favor of this, and so the contracts that are currently in place would finish out, because this doesn't end anybody's contract. And then once those contracts are done, Takoma Parks or other third-party ones, people could choose either to stay in those contracts. If they're automatically renewing, they would automatically stay in them. And if they are not, then they could be put into the CCE.
So it would be treated just like a third-party supplier.
And suggest that in addition to having one more questioner on this bill, we've got about 10 bills to go. So I think we might need to, in some cases, follow up more offline.
Thank you. I'm happy to have additional conversations.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I can save the questions for the work group.
Okay, thank you. Senator Klossmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Delegate. I am so worried about this bill. You can't imagine. It's taken us this long that the chairman has had to say, we're going to have to do some more offline. This is a big step when you think about it. And I spent in 1999 a whole session. I couldn't even do the electric slide anymore because I was so tired of talking about electricity. But I know I'm just stating how I feel right now. I'm just very upset. But I just want to know about the pilot study. First of all, it's 1.2 million people. We know that's been going all around. But for 7 years, and how long is it going to take, and how much money from the Public Service Commission is it going to cost to set this program up? And for 7 years, I could be dead in 7 years, and it's not even 7 years, it's going to be 10 years. And by then it's going to be like, well, this is the way Montgomery County did it. You need to start small, I think. And why can't you just start in your Takoma Park and just start small? And so we can see how it works. And plus, I don't think you stated that all the other counties can look at Montgomery County as the model, but I don't know if that's in the bill. And also, what's to prohibit, if this bill goes on the floor, from senators just dumping on Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County? All of a sudden, the whole state goes. We need to study this before we go ahead and do such a big project. Do you agree?
Well, I don't. Respectfully, I don't agree. I think that this gives us a chance to study it. Thank you for your questions, and I appreciate your recognition of the complexity of the issue, but I have been studying it for 3 years now. And I've studied what's going on in all these other states, and this state has considered it on and off. And I would say that last year, when the chairman of Economic Matters, initially this was a statewide bill. And when the chairman of Economic Matters sort of spoke to it, he essentially said, you know, we've been looking at this on and off for a while. And since Montgomery County is primarily the ones who are affected, and really the rest of the state is not affected, and they seem to want it, all the elected officials there want it, this gives us as a state a good chance to say, okay, if we're not sure this is good for everybody, but Montgomery County wants it and other people aren't hurt by it, maybe this really is an opportunity to get some answers to these questions that we wouldn't be able to get unless we had you know, a full chance to like let it play out for a little while. And so
Well,
that was sort of,
But most pilot studies last for about, or go on for 2 years. And then they come back to the General Assembly as collectively. You keep saying, you know, I've done this, I've done that. And maybe one day you can work for the Public Service Commission because you really got your I's dotted and the T's crossed.
Okay.
Doesn't that mean, but you really know what you're talking about. But there's so many complex parts of this. That's what just worries me. Would you be willing to cut down the amount of years that you have in the pilot study down to like 2 years and then come back to the General Assembly to see how it's going?
well, I appreciate your openness to sort of the learning that can come from this process. The concern about 2 years is because we've put in so many guardrails to make sure that nobody outside is affected and so on and so forth. By the time we get through 2 years, we've only just gotten everybody on, because we're moving people onto it slowly so that it doesn't disrupt the SOS contracts. But after 2 years, we've only just gotten everybody onto it. And so the idea was to allow for a few years after everybody has been transitioned onto it, so we could actually see what full contracts look like over the course of a couple of years. And then I think some of the first, I think the way that we've got it, I'd have to take a look, but we do have reports coming to the General Assembly along the way, and we can certainly strengthen those if you think that would be helpful. I don't want to hold up the committee now looking.
Okay, and just want to, you have to start thinking about the Senate Bill 31, which requires the suppliers to beat the utility price. I mean, you've got to start looking at those that are disadvantaged and don't have the wherewithal to look at all the different prices, but that's just a few things. But as I said, those are just the things that I'm thinking in my head right now. And we've done this for almost an hour. So I just don't know how this is going to work for 9 years or 7 years. I'm just very, very concerned. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going next to the county executive, Mark Eldridge.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank the committee for giving me an opportunity to speak today, and thank Delegate Charkoudian for the work she's done diligently on this bill, and to the rest of the Montgomery delegation for the support they've given her. I think, you know, we all know we're in the middle of a climate crisis. This is not a secret, and it's not a theory anymore. I'm certain that if the tragedy of COVID wasn't the year-long disaster that it is, then the unfolding story this year would have been of the worsening climate change that would have pushed everything else off the front page, except for maybe a few odd behaviors people had. In Montgomery County, we declared a climate emergency, calling on all levels of government to initiate a massive global mobilization to restore a safe climate and build a sustainable economy, and to transform the climate by reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2027, and initiate large-scale efforts to remove excess carbon from the atmosphere. Yes, that is a big load to be trying to accomplish, but it is what the work we need to do. We must all take possible steps, necessary steps, to address climate change and move to clean renewable energy as quickly and as widely as possible, and this work has to be done at every level of government. House Bill 768 gives the county one important tool as we work towards eliminating greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a tool that encourages competition, which is something we all want. The county could offer a large contract that would require clean energy at a reasonable price. I can't think of a better way for Montgomery County to encourage competition for clean energy. I'm a big believer that a contract of this size will attract companies that want to bid for the contract, offer us better pricing. We already have competition. I have clean energy companies competing for my electric bill every month, and the larger the buyer, the better the deal that we're going to be able to get. Community choice energy gives us a chance to better control our fuel sources. House Bill 768 does not require us to implement a CCE, but it gives us the option to act, and it's really the tool that we need. We just released our draft climate plan, which our strategic plan is to get to that ambitious goal of 80% by 2027 and 100% by 2035. Yes, we're a little bit ahead of the state in that timeline. We are introducing legislation that require both new and existing buildings to move toward greatly reduced, if not completely eliminate, GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. But no matter what we do, without a supply of clean energy, attaining the reduction of greenhouse gases that we need to achieve cannot be achieved. CCE is identified as one of the top actions to help us reach our goal. CCE gives us a reasonable chance to purchase and generate clean energy for as many residents and businesses as possible. It also has the potential to lower rates for consumers. With CCE, we think the county can move faster toward clean energy and lower rates for consumers. We are in a climate emergency and we need to use all the tools possible. And this is a tool the county really would like to have. We can take advantage of it. We think we'll be successful of it. And I think we'll get the best of both worlds, better energy, cleaner energy at a reasonable price. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Senator Feldman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two quick things for the county exec. First, I would note for the committee that if you look at the bill at the bottom of page 15, top of 16, to Senator Klausmeyer's point about reviewing this, there is actually an annual reporting requirement each and every year where the PSC has to come up with a report to monitor how this is going. But for the county executive, you obviously have talked to some of your counterparts around the state. And I know that Baltimore City, for example, had passed a resolution supportive of this idea. I know County Executive Pittman has indicated strong support for possibly Anne Arundel doing this. So I guess from your standpoint, Mr. County Executive, do you view Montgomery as sort of being a bit the guinea pig here? In other words, you're going out and whatever the problems, whatever works out, whether it's Baltimore City, Anne Arundel, and I'd be interested if that's how you see us trying to, put our county out front to see if this works. And if it doesn't work out, we've, solved some problems for some of the other jurisdictions. And secondly, beyond Anne Arundel and Baltimore City, have you talked to County Executive Alsobrooks or any of the other county executives who have an interest at some point in the future to do this or try this?
So I think other people are looking to see how this works out for us. But I think the more fundamental question is, are we a guinea pig? And I think that, the work that LORG's done, indicates there are lots of other guinea pigs out there. This experiment, this laboratory has been run elsewhere. Everybody, Maryland's not unique. Any problem that we have is a problem that somebody else confronts, whether it's suppliers, whether it's competition among suppliers, whether it's, having companies like Exelon as your provider of your wires now, back to the old days again. Everything we're experiencing is something somebody else has done. So I look at this as being able to learn from what other people have done, to adopt the best practices from other people. I'm not a believer that Montgomery County has to invent everything, that we can actually learn from people who've been here before. And so in looking around at the work that's been done, we have plenty of models. We've got lots of opportunities to consult while the public, the PSCC, Public Service Commission is doing its work. We'll be doing our work to make sure that whatever we put in place is founded in the best practices that other people around the country have already used. And since it's been used successfully, we think we can build on this and launch a successful program. So we're not guinea pigs, I think.
No, that was not, let me just clarify. That wasn't a good choice of words on my part. I would say is, we're going to have a periodic annual report from the PSC to see how this is working, which will be instructive.
Yes.
Other jurisdiction that might want to explore. That's what I really meant to say, Madam Chair. Poor choice of words there, but thank you, Mr.
Okay.
President.
All right. Thank you. All right. We're going next to David Lapp from the Office of People's Counsel. They're favorable with an amendment.
Thank you, Chair Kelly and members of the Senate Finance Committee. The Office of People's Counsel applauds the work of the Montgomery County delegation, and we wholeheartedly support HB 768. Our written comments describe the many potential consumer and environmental benefits of community choice energy and provide our favorable amendments. I wanted to make 4 quick points. First, the bill is a pro-consumer bill. Retail choice is not benefiting large numbers of Maryland customers. Less than 20% participate, and there's evidence that it's hurting many at-risk customers who have been taken advantage of. The best solution is to not return to the days of greater monopoly control. Rather, there's a third alternative: aggregate the buying power of residential customers. This bill does just that. Second, the bill does not restrict consumer choice. As you heard, residential customers can still choose retail suppliers and even utility standard offer service. You may hear misplaced complaints about it being an opt-out program, but the current system is already an opt-out program. Customers across the state who don't opt out are enrolled by default into the utility service without any notice requirements. In contrast, HB 768 contains numerous notice requirements for county residents to opt out. The utility has no inherent right to be the default provider. That choice is just a matter of public policy. HB 768 just makes the default provider the county rather than the utility. Third, the bill makes good public policy. It promotes competition. It doesn't detract from it. And unlike competitive suppliers, the county is locally accountable. Retail suppliers fear this bill because they want to exclude an effective competitor from the market. If they can compete on the merits, they have nothing to fear. Fourth, the bill contains numerous measures to ensure that customers outside of Montgomery County are not harmed. In fact, we think that consumers outside of the county can benefit from the competitive benchmark and pressures resulting from the county program. In short, aggregating customers at the community level increases local accountability, it empowers residential customers, and it promotes competition by giving buying power to small consumers. We ask the committee to issue a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we're going to hear from William Kress with an unfavorable.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Bill Kress here today on behalf of the Retail Energy Supply Association. We are in opposition to the bill. We could be favorable with amendments. Certain amendments were adopted by the committee. But let me just say, first of all, I think some good points have been made. This is a 7-year pilot program of 1.2 million people. It has far-reaching impacts across all ratepayers in the state. And with respect, let me go to consumer protection, because that seems to be an issue that the proponents have brought up. This bill allows for opt-out, and that is switching a customer without their affirmative consent. And that is by definition slamming. If a supplier were to do that in the private market, they would be before the Public Service Commission facing fines and hearings. So there is no choice in that sense. If you look at the data across the nation, 80% of the folks that are in a aggregation program did not see the notice and were switched without their consent. So I take issue with some of these ideas that this is consumer protection is provided in this bill. Let me get to the issue of how this affects the state and all the ratepayers. So this bill allows for generation to be owned by the aggregation group. There are no limits in the bill. I respect the delegate, and she's done a lot of work on this bill, but there are no limits in the bill. I could point you to Marin County, California, which has an aggregation group. They have $1 billion in long-term debt. And so what you should be asking yourself is, what happens if this aggregation program doesn't work out? You're going to have stranded costs for the supply that they bought. You could potentially have a lot of stranded costs for generation, and you have to unwind that. How's it going to affect all the ratepayers in the state? My suggestion would be that Montgomery County would come in with a political solution, possibly to spread the cost or to lock those ratepayers into the aggregation group. Neither of those solutions are really good for the state as a whole. So this is a far-reaching bill that really deserves some work group effort, some study, and some thought about how to move forward if you want to move forward with the aggregation group. But I would say first and foremost, it should be opt-in, not opt-out. Secondly, you need to deal with the generation issue. And then thirdly, you need to deal with folks who are on energy assistance. If the suppliers have to provide a price at or below the SOS rates, the aggregation group should be doing the same. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, that ends the testimony on this
Are we
bill.
taking, Madam Chair, no questions, or we're done? Are there any questions?
Are there any questions, Mr. Kress?
I had a question or two. I see Senator Hershey and Senator Reedy had their hands up as well. Okay, Madam Chair, could I ask Mr. Kress just one or two quick ones? Madam Chair, yes?
Yes.
Okay, hey, Bill, just a couple quick ones. So when we talk about, debt, but I mean, that's a Montgomery County problem, isn't it? I mean, like, it's not, nobody else in the state's gonna, I mean, Montgomery County elected officials go this route. I mean, I appreciate the concern for Montgomery County taxpayers, but the fact is like that, we have elections and folks can get voted out of. I mean, that's a Montgomery County debt problem. That's not like a statewide problem, is it? I mean, just to be clear.
Well, that might be the case, but the bill doesn't address it.
Okay. And then as far as ratepayer impact, you heard Delegate Charkoudian's explanation about why, ratepayers elsewhere in the state are impacted. I mean, the Office of People's Counsel, who are supposed to be looking out for our residential ratepayers, are supporting the bill. So just to have to put that out there in terms of reconciling, the consumers, ratepayer concerns and all the rest. So, the OPC, that's their job, is to sort of weigh in on those issues, and they're weighing in support of the bill.
So let me respond to you in this way. I think the proponents of this bill want as much renewable energy as they can get, and that is likely to result in costs higher than SOS. So there's no, and I think the proponents and the sponsor has said in testimony that there is no guarantee it will be lower than SOS cost. And that's just a fact of wholesale markets. I would also add that we've seen in other states where aggregation programs have been shut down because they couldn't beat the cost of the SOS. So it's not that it's a panacea. Look, it's dependent upon wholesale markets. And what I'm saying to the committee is maybe look at some additional language and guardrails to put additional protections in the bill.
Okay, Senator Hershey. And then Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question for David, if I could, please. David, you had kind of compared this back to the default or SOS provider, but I want to make sure I understand. Service through SOS is basically structured to obtain the lowest price, right? Through a bid process where PSC selects the lowest bid. But this is far different, right? This is structured based on the priorities of an elected body, correct?
Well, I would say that the SOS price is determined in a manner that, yes, attempts to achieve the lowest cost over a longer period of time. It's not necessarily the lowest cost at any exact period of time. but it's procured in different blocks at different periods for residential customers. Over all residential customers are procured for over the course of 2 years in 4 different procurements. But yes, cost is the major consideration there.
Okay.
Here, the
And
Montgomery
cost-
County bill does make this bill does make cost a consideration, an important consideration, and
One of many.
There.
One
Well,
of many.
no, well, I would say that it may be the only one that's specifically spelled out. So I would say it is a primary consideration that over time,
so going back,
the cost is
yeah.
anticipated to be
Your
less
office
than,
also came
or
in
to be
support.
roughly.
Right. Your office also
Sorry,
came in
go ahead.
support of Senate Bill 31, in which we talked about transferring over customers that were on energy assistance to SOS because of the cost itself. And that was a concern that the retail suppliers were not offering a cost that was better than what SOS should have been, and therefore we should move that. Do you think that any aggregation customer should be given that same opportunity, or should be, forced back to SOS if we find out the aggregation prices are higher than that, if they're on energy assistance?
Just to be clear, if I'm recalling correctly, that bill did not require customers to go to standard offered service. It requires retail suppliers to meet or come in below the standard offer price. The retail suppliers can still serve those customers. So I think similar can be done with the Montgomery County bill. I'd have to look at the particulars. But the price is, the legislation does call for the price to be to be as good over a period of time, really, as the standard offer price.
Well, I don't think.
There are protections of the Public Service Commission. So, I mean, really the bill provides, in some respects, greater protections than ratepayers receive elsewhere in the state, because they have the protections afforded to them by the vote as well as by PSC regulation. So they can hold their elected officials accountable.
Right. So we're not going to agree on that, because that's every 4 years that they have elections there. So I'm concerned that we have taken this one approach with SB 31. And I think that, again, as the department that's concerned about the consumers, you'd want to be able to find a way to kind of roll those, at least the premise of what we did there, into this bill to make sure they're protected. One of the things you also talked about on Senate Bill 31 was slamming. And isn't a opt-out a form of slamming? Isn't that exactly what this is?
I don't think so. No, not at all. I think that there are numerous notice provisions in the bill, for one, but it's no more slamming than when a customer, say, moves into Montgomery County, say they buy a house or move into an apartment and they're having to set up their own electricity, they automatically get put on the standard offer service. Now, if you want to call that slamming, then you could call this slamming, but it's no more slamming than putting a customer automatically on the utilities default service.
Yeah, but
it's
David,
very
that's
different.
That's a function of our system.
Right.
That's a function of our system. We don't have instant connect. So a new subscriber couldn't walk in and say, I want new service, and by the way, I want it from this retail supplier. We don't have instant connect. So they'd have to go to SOS first, and then they could make the change, right?
Respectfully, I disagree with that. I mean, I think the current system could ensure that customers moving into a new property have a full array of options presented to them. And that's not the case now. They are
Okay.
automatically put on standard offer service.
Maybe we should roll that into this one. And I don't know if the PSC is looking at InstaConnect, but maybe that's something that we should look at as well too with respect to this. So, okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
All right, and finally, Senator Reedy.
You'll be relieved to know, Madam Chair, that my questions have been answered, but they've been at least addressed. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Then that ends the testimony on this very interesting bill. We're going next to House Bill 1211, Delegate Barnes.
Thank you so much, Madam
Delegate,
Chair.
you have whatever time you need to lay out the parameters of your bill.
Yeah, I don't, my mind is pretty quick, so I'm not going to hold you guys. That was a real interesting bill. But listen, I'm here to speak on House Bill 1211. This is part of our Speaker's Black agenda. This bill has passed through Ways and Means as well as the House floor. House Bill 1211 invests in and provides executive support in Maryland-based technology companies run by entrepreneurs who demonstrate economic disadvantages. The main purpose of the fund is to support the development of startup companies run by entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds who have historically lacked access to traditional forms of capital and executive network at the pre-seed stage. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic on our state economy has complex budget challenges. Despite the challenges, we should not be stagnant from taking action. It is well known that startup ecosystems are the key to a growing and vibrant state economy. It would promote clusters of talent and drive job creation, new business formation, and attract investment capital across the state of Maryland. But we must ensure our economically disadvantaged tech entrepreneurs are not overlooked in the process. House Bill 1211 is necessary to support and enable Maryland-based technology companies run by entrepreneurs who demonstrate economic disadvantages, the resources to mobilize their companies for the greater good of all of Maryland. And for those reasons, I ask that you all support House Bill 1211.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, we'll go next then to Angela Singleton, favorable with an amendment.
Angela, you're on mute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Angela Singleton, and I'm here to tell you why I am the former director of the Builder Fund and not the current one. The ever-present theme of TEDCO is the lack of funding for women and minorities, yes, particularly on its larger sized funds. I and two other African Americans were hired to assist with this problem, but we were treated merely as window dressing at TEDCO. As minority managers, we had to work twice as hard to secure funding for minority businesses, particularly on its seed investment funds. As minority managers, we were excluded from leadership meetings. We sat in cubicles while our white counterparts occupied offices, and we were designated as program managers while our white peers were designated as directors. It took an outside HR consultant to give me my rightful title. There were also complaints of gender discrimination for years before TEDCO's board of directors chose to investigate. At the time of the investigation, the TEDCO board brought on 2 females as its chair and its vice chair, and as more window dressing. When the investigation was concluded, the 4 female employees who reported discrimination were retaliated against by the board of directors. The board of directors hired 2 more female managers, but this time only as interims, but also as more window dressing, to fire those women who reported discrimination. 2 were successfully fired, myself included. Once again, TEDCO's board of directors continued its strategy of window dressing and hired an African-American male CEO, which overshadows what happened to us women. TEDCO's actions are illegal. And last month, I filed an EEOC complaint against TEDCO and its board of directors. As it pertains to this bill, why would you want to invest more constituent money into an organization that does not have an authentic interest in minorities and women? I respectfully ask the committee to amend the bill to provide for a comprehensive, independent investigation of the ongoing race and gender discrimination at TEDCO and by its board of directors, and to implement the recommendations of the investigation before placing additional funds there. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask, since there is this subtitle, Pre-Seed Builder Fund, do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, so I think the bill seeks to add money into a early stage fund, and African Americans are overlooked at TEDCO on the larger sized funds, the seed investment funds and the Maryland Venture Fund, for example. So the question is, will that adding this money to the pre-seed fund really help? This money really deserves to be in one of its bigger sized funds. And also the bigger issue here is that there is a culture of cover up at TEDCO, okay? Diversity is a cover up at TEDCO and not a culture. And so it's no place to house these funds and administer this program, including the Pre-Seed Builder Fund program. So the question becomes, how do you make diversity part of the culture at TEDCO as opposed to part of a constant cover-up? And then once you remove the toxic culture at TEDCO, then it would be a place to administer these types of programs and to, optimize its community service effort on your behalf as an entity.
Now, you did sign up, or you're signed up here as favorable with an amendment. What are you favorable regarding?
Yes, I think this is a great bill, but it doesn't take into account the cultural problem at TEDCO. Should TEDCO be administering the funds that are provided by this bill? And so I think that the Legislative Services pointed out TEDCO's bad financial practices in the 2019 session, and those were corrected, but no one pointed out the prevalent race and gender discrimination inside of TEDCO. And so if the bill is amended to simply investigate that internal toxicity and that race and gender discrimination inside TEDCO, and certain recommendations are made that TEDCO can then implement to improve its culture overall, then this bill would be a healthy bill.
Let me just ask, since you say you were there and you no longer are, how long since you were a part of TEDCO?
Yes, ma'am. I was fired from TEDCO on June 19th, 2020, just at the start of this COVID-19 crisis. And it was part of a retaliation scheme, which again is illegal. I started in TEDCO in 2012. And
Okay,
I was
actually just trying to get an idea if what you're telling us about TEDCO is about it as it is today.
Correct. Yes.
Or as it was in the past.
Yes. Well, I think it's current. It's definitely within the last year. And so, and I think that there are several people that would be helped by this bill that are still there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Okay. That ends the testimony on that bill. We're going next to House Bill 41, Delegate Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You have the time that you need to lay out the parameters of your bill, and other persons testifying on the bill will have 2.5 minutes each.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And also thank you to your Vice Chair Feldman, to all the distinguished members of the committee. This is my first time before Senate Finance, and I'm very happy to be here. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, and I'm here to present House Bill 41, and hopefully for your favorable consideration. Across Maryland, there are communities with high proportions of underbanked and unbanked households, and communities that have experienced multi-generational disinvestment. Often the same communities face this dual burden. To transform the financial health of underserved households and advance the community development goals of their communities, I have introduced House Bill 41 to establish a Maryland Public Bank Task Force. I was drawn to this concept in light of the ongoing challenges posed by COVID-19, as well as an ABLE Foundation report that discussed that when profit maximizing firms lack an affirmative public service mandate, subprime can quickly shade into predation. Exploring the feasibility of a Maryland public bank does not seek to replace private sector banking, but to supplement the capitalization of communities with unmet needs. For our disinvested communities to receive the capital needed to start businesses, innovate housing affordability, and realize infrastructure improvements will require creativity and more coordinated investment strategies in the public interest to ultimately entice further private sector partnership and support. Hashing out the merits, design, and purpose of such a sensitive financial endeavor requires a thoughtful collaboration among relevant stakeholders. With that in mind, House Bill 41 aims to establish a 17-member Maryland Public Bank Task Force, which would perform an assessment of the state's current public and private network of financial institutions for the purpose of identifying unmet community needs, which the new state bank could aim to target. The task force would in general explore, how could there be reduced costs paid by state government for banking services? How could a Maryland public bank provide financial stability through its investments in other financial institutions? Could these, earnings generated beyond those necessary for continued operation, how would that look? And how would they supplement the general fund of the state? And also examine how integrating a state bank model into the existing state financial services network, including lending capital to banks, credit unions, and nonprofit community development financial institutions, just in general, and analyzing how there could be a merit and opportunity to taking up and establishing a Maryland public bank. But ultimately, we want to evaluate the long-term impact of creating a Maryland state bank on economic growth, job creation, and state revenues. So as we all know, the recent pressures on state and local revenues should be spurring us to reevaluate the impact of the status quo. As a legislature, we are charged with stewardship of Maryland's tax dollars, and we should be assured that we're always realizing the best outcomes to improve the quality of life for our most vulnerable Marylanders. Our collective economic resilience is tied to being mindful of the possibilities of fiscal innovation. And I just wanted to, as a practical matter, bring to your attention that to date, there's only one continuously existing public bank in the United States, and that would be the Public Bank of North Dakota. And as many of us know, through the challenges posed by COVID, small businesses, farms, and many other entities were financially stressed and looking to secure PPP funds. And North Dakota essentially ate every other state's lunch in the distribution of PPP funds. And a lot of that was due to the fact that they had a strong state public bank that was supporting their community and local bank infrastructure to really get out, those funds not only quickly, but at more than 5,000 per private sector worker, which was quite impressive. They've now moved on to two successor opportunities beyond PPP to address ongoing ways to support their jurisdiction. So for me, a Maryland state bank could be more of a banker's bank model, which is the North Dakota model, much more focused on helping jurisdictions and really supporting the existing financial market. Or it could also seek to meet the unmet personal finance needs. But I think I'm not most suitable to make that decision. And that's why I proposed a task force to bring all of the players from the governor's recommended participants to those recommended by the Maryland legislature, to the comptroller, the treasurer, and all the way down to those interested in consumer finance, labor, and other related fields. So I do hope that with your careful consideration that you'll welcome opportunity to have all the information needed. And that's what I believe a public bank task force will provide us with. So without further delay, I thank you for your time today. And I do respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 41. Thank you all for your time today.
Okay, let me start by just asking a question. It occurs to me that so long, the fiscal note is really about establishing a task force. It's not really about what it would take to create and to operate such a bank. and to do so successfully so that it could continue to exist for decades or centuries. What is the vision that you have of how we could have something that would last as long as North Dakota's has? I understand that's about 100 years, but it was a different time. And how is it doing now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So to your first question, you're correct. The fiscal note is really about the staffing, right, of the task force, and ultimately the task force their recommendations, that would result at the end of the year would really lay out more of the nuts and bolts of some of the costs I think you were mentioning, like, well, how much would we really need, right? So one of the reasons why the North Dakota Bank has been so successful for so long, just over 100 years, is that it holds all of North Dakota's dollars, tax dollars are held within this bank, right? So there is a sustainability to the fact that, unlike a business, municipalities are actually, and states, a better bet because of the fact that our business consumers don't evaporate, they don't choose a new product. They're our taxpayers, they're the residents. And so with North Dakota, they not only have had 16 consecutive years of just extremely, extreme profitability, but they've also been able to respond when there's been challenges. And that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to the task force versus just putting it in a bill about creating a bank, is that I thought that wasn't thoughtful. I didn't think it was responsible. And I thought there were too many perspectives that really needed to come to bear with greater expertise and even mine to ensure that if you were to pursue this as a state, that it was done in a way that would be sustainable. Ultimately, a banker's bank model like North Dakota, bankers are ultimately the ones that advise the work around what their bank does, not politicians. You need people that have a certain set of expertise to ensure that the bank is solvent, makes good decisions, and the like. But North Dakota has been an excellent model of durability. And when there's been not only this is a public health disaster we're in, but when there's been natural disasters, right, like extreme flooding, other things that provide, challenges to localities, they've been much more nimble in responding to businesses that have had adverse impacts to those types of threats. Unlike
well, you're going kind of beyond, and I'm still trying to be sure I understand.
Yes, ma'am.
If you got the number of people you wanted on the task force and they were to say, okay, we recommend to the General Assembly and to the governor that we create a state bank. And that bank, you just said North Dakota's holds all the tax dollars of the state. And that's where, so it would be very disruptive because it would tear down everything about the way we do banking and the way we run state finances now. Have you thought about how your effort could end up being very frustrating to people who would serve? How long would this task force be?
It would commence in July and the report would be in December.
For 12 months. And so in 12 months, you're going to create a state entity that would be a bank. Would it be subject to the FDIC?
I want to respectfully just pull back a bit. This is just a bill about a task force to get to the brass tacks about what you're talking about. I don't feel that I could responsibly and credibly give you all of the details about what the establishment of a state bank would look like, which is expressly why I started with a task force versus just throwing a bill together about something, because I didn't think that was the responsible path.
Well, then in that case, let me ask you, who would serve, what kinds of expertise and what range of personnel would you need to serve on such a task force effectively? Because they're going to need to know a lot more than the average person knows.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. So there would be a chair appointed by the governor. There would be one member of the Finance Committee appointed by the President of the Senate. There would also be one member of Economic Matters Committee recommended by the Speaker. There would be the State Treasurer or their designee, the Comptroller of Maryland or their designee, the Secretary of Commerce or their designee, the Commissioner of Financial Regulation or their designee, the Director of the Office of Finance Programs or their designee, the Director of the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation or their designee, the Director of the Maryland Small Business Development Financing Authority or their designee, the President of the Maryland and District of Columbia Credit Union Association or their designee, the President of the Maryland Bankers Association or their designee, and the following members appointed by the governor: a representative of the labor community, a representative of an academic and research economic policy institution, and then remaining 3 members of the public knowledgeable about the state's banking sector, finance, and economic development, of which at least 1 is a member of the community banking community and 1 is a member of the consumer advocacy community.
Well, for an example, the Office of Financial Regulation from the state of Maryland, they are really already tied to the existing banking system. And you would ask someone who would no longer have any role to play in Maryland, really, if we did with the state tax dollars, what you'd like this task force to do. Have you thought about?
Yes, I talked to Mr. Salazar with that with that agency in the interim. And so one of my initial recommendations coming from them was actually to have DLS staff this commission. But unfortunately, DLS felt that they didn't have the capacity. So I was actually sensitive to what you're noting, is that, you know, they might feel kind of like in the mix of it. But I would welcome any work from the Senate if they wanted to reimagine their participation with it. You know, I'm not one of those people that's too.
Well, wouldn't you need somebody who knew who knew the U.S. banking system and how to establish a state bank if that were something that the state wanted to do?
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I forgot.
With 1 year, you would want a group of people who have no expertise at establishing banks at all to establish something that would replace the banking system that already exists in the state of Maryland.
I think there's 2 things we're talking about. We're talking about maybe an authorizing set of legislation that launches a bank. And then we're talking about almost like a review of your existing banking system to see if there's even a potentiality around a state bank adding value. My bill is very much about the latter. It's about, do we even need to get so far as to contemplate the establishment of a bank if we come at the end of this and go, you know what? Maybe a state bank. But if we do come away saying there's some blind spots that perhaps a state bank can meet, I don't think that there's anything off the table about revisiting an additional work group. This is a very preliminary matter to see if there's any benefit at all.
Okay, I guess my question is this. Have you thought about the fact you're talking about a 1 year, just 12-month task force of people who basically are not in banking at all? Determining what to recommend to the state about if this is feasible, and if so, how to do it. And that was my question, but you don't have that. But that was a concern that I have.
I appreciate that.
Too little time. You may not have the right mix of people here to consider it. All right, are there other questions? Okay, we're going then to Kelly Schmitz, Maryland Center on Economic Policy.
Thank you, Chair Kelly and members of the committee for allowing me to testify today. My name is Callie Schmitz with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization. And we believe that all Marylanders should be able to achieve their full potential in a healthy economy that offers a widely shared and rising standard of living. We believe House Bill 41 would help advance those goals. As Delegate Smith began in her testimony, having access to a community bank can be a really critical component for people to build long-term economic security and stability. That applies to families, to small businesses, and to the community at large. Having a relationship with a financial institution helps people secure loans to make bigger investments like buying a car, home, or starting a business. And we know that because, in part because of the long history of discriminatory policies in the private financial services sector, there are too many Marylanders who have limited or no access to a bank in their community, particularly those in low-income communities and communities of color. A public bank can serve multiple functions, and I think part of the value of having a task force to look at this is to kind of look at what would be the best fit for Maryland. But the general idea is that it is serving the best interests of the community. They can serve as a depository for state or local funds, which they can be then leveraged to support specific community needs. I think the general approach is to partner rather than compete with community banks. It doesn't necessarily mean tearing up our entire banking system, but just looking at a way of doing things a little bit differently and making sure and really leveraging our public dollars to support community needs. There's a growing number of cities and states exploring public banking, even though North Dakota is the only one that has an established public bank. But we think it's worthwhile for Maryland to take a serious look at establishing a public bank, and the task force is an appropriate next step to evaluate this concept and see whether and how it could best serve Maryland families and communities. So we would ask for a favorable report on House Bill 41. Thank you.
Let me just ask you this, since you are with an organization that does economic policy, of the goals that I see on the bill summary, one would be to provide stability to the local financial sector without entering into competition with community banks, credit unions, or other financial institutions. In 1 year, how would you guys figure that out, if that's possible?
I think there are, a range of people who have, wouldn't necessarily be me or our organization, but I think there are a lot of people out there who have in the academic sector or other like national organizations or regional organizations that have taken deeper looks at this and could help provide that expertise of the best way to do that. There's a lot of existing research, as Delegate Smith mentioned, the ABLE Foundation report that came out in 2019 that has a lot of information and research that's been done. But yeah, I think the idea is that you can create something that leverages public dollars and serves the communities that aren't being served right now by the private banking sector.
Okay, one other last question. You want the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to staff this task force. Now, right now, they spend all of their time and their job is in state law to work with the FDIC and with the Federal Reserve to make sure that we've got the proper standards in place in Maryland so that we don't lose people's deposits, so that people who need to leverage what they deposit can reap the benefits of that and so on. So they would really be working against the job they already have. It would probably cost us something to have them stop doing the job theirs by state and federal law they have to do right now in order to staff a 1-year task force to create something that would change the whole banking system and I guess put them out of business. Have you thought about if somebody else would be better able than asking the entity that regulates banking in Maryland now to staff the 1-year task force to create something other than what they are?
And I guess from our perspective, we think that is an entity that has a lot of expertise because of their role in the current banking system. And again, I think the idea is not to replace the current banking system. We will still have private sector banks, but really add and complement to what is already there. So, I think defer to that agency of whether, they would need additional staffing or other support to be able to staff it without doing their other duties. I would expect that they would continue to perform their other, legally required duties at the same time.
And your organization thinks that 12 months would be long enough to get this all done?
Yes, I believe, for the initial review to see it, and as Delegate Smith was mentioning, I think, there could potentially need to be additional steps in developing legislation, an additional work group that is getting into more of the details after just taking an initial look at the concept.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, then we're going to Rob.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a question.
Senator Hayes.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the disadvantages that we have as a committee is a lot of these agencies don't respond, and we didn't get anything from the regulation, the Financial Regulation Board on this bill. But the question that I have for the panel is, I wonder if, like, for smaller banks that exist in the current system, would something like a public bank provide them opportunities to make bigger risks? In my experience in dealing with a lot of small businesses, some of the more traditional banks are, risk averting. And so I wonder, like, if you're a small institution as a banking institution, would providing, this is an option, help those smaller banks provide bigger risk that would be more stable?
I'll go, and then maybe Kelly, you could follow up. Thank you, Senator Hayes. To be frank, for the committee, this was a big reason why I even introduced the bill. I mean, I grew up a lifelong member of credit unions. My mom managed a credit union. Now that I live in Maryland, I still belong to credit unions. I belong to other banks. Harbor Bank is literally 2 blocks from my house. I financed the purchase of our first home with a bank that's no longer around, but was also a Black-led bank. So the reason why I thought this was important is that the North Dakota model actually shows that they have more community banks per capita than anywhere else because they have a state bank that provides more leverage for them to take risks they otherwise wouldn't take. They're a partner. So I'll give you an example. I was reading a Washington Post article where a small bank said that there's a risk that they might feel on the ledge about, but because they have the state bank in their corner, they'll give them a slice of that business, but they know that the state bank isn't going to steal their customer, because there's no motive to do that. They're just there to help make sure that they can do as much as they can to serve their community. So where I'm sitting at in East Baltimore City, we see that the current landscape has unmet needs. We don't even need a work group to see that. You can just look to your left and right. There's unmet community development opportunities and unmet financial needs across Maryland. And so when we look at that already, knowing there's people with unmet needs and entities and jurisdictions with unmet needs, then it begets us to think a bit outside of the box around a solution. And I definitely believe when you are strengthening local and community banks, you're strengthening part of the financial ecosystem that is most committed to Maryland. So I see the state bank as a way to buoy and actually give additional leverage. Not a competitor, not something to undermine them, but an actual lifeline. So that's kind of the genesis of where this
I just want to be sure that those of us on Senate Finance can really understand where you see the reserves coming from and the deposits that would be there available to both create leverage so they've got the extra income to be able to lend out to the people that you're concerned about. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are underbanked and underserved, but I'm just wondering how would we go? I'm just asking, is it reasonable to think that in 12 months, a task force is going to come up with a plan as to how you would even fund it initially? Where would the reserves come from?
I think the task force is supposed to just say, hey, one, is there an unmet need that a public bank could, address? Then the next step is, if they were to address it, to your point, where would the reserves come from? Where would that come from? How much would that be? It's more of an accounting of, this is what it would take to make this possible. The next step would probably have to be another intermediate legislative intervention about, do we think that we have the Constitution or the wherewithal to do what is recommended to get us to this optimal outcome? I believe it's premature for me to tell you what that would be without the work group's, product, the task force.
But you would concede that somehow you would need to come up with deposits and reserves, of course, so that a bank has what it needs in order to serve anybody.
Well, to your point, my tax dollars, your tax dollars are sitting in a lot of Wall Street banks that don't really care what's happening in Maryland. Their portfolio is so vast, their macro needs are going to definitely be here to our micro needs, right? So the way I look at it, the existing paradigm is my money, your money, and everyone else's money are sitting with institutions that don't necessarily have our...
I don't think there's any argument about that. I guess I'm just asking, when you come up with a good idea, you've got to figure out how you're going to get from A to B. And for a 12-month task force to be expected to get us somewhere and to figure out how we're going to finance the development of the bank. And in 12 months, a task force, and you got legislators and other people with no banking experience really.
Well, Madam Chair, I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm not married to composition, and I'm not married to the duration. It is the work product of the Senate committee at this point. So to the extent you felt that there needed to be modifications, I'm open to that. You guys have expertise. I don't. I sit on Ways and Means. I figure out how to tax people. You figure out where their money goes. So I
just thought the fiscal note didn't say much, and I wanted to be sure you had an opportunity to tell us what else on your mind in terms of how you see this.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I wasn't
Senator Hayes.
Questions. you jumped in. I didn't. The other thing that I wasn't sure about, I see that the comptroller has come in favorable for the legislation, but I wonder if you've had a conversation with the treasurer and received any feedback. I understand that the treasurer has attempted to use our current deposits to leverage other community development opportunities, but that hasn't been very successful here in the state. And I wonder if she's had an opportunity to provide you any feedback as it relates to this exploration.
No, I don't see anything.
Nothing from the treasurer?
I don't see anything.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Sponsor.
And I guess considering who has really control of the state dollars is the governor. We got nothing from their office either. I mean, when you got to figure out how we're going to get from A to B.
Right. No, I just
know,
looking at other pieces of legislation, the treasurer has expressed disappointment in trying to leverage the deposits that we currently have for other community development stuff. So I think she would feel pretty strongly about this issue as well. And I'd love to hear, and I could reach out to her definitely if the sponsor hasn't already done so.
Okay. All right, we're going to the final witness who signed up for oral testimony, and that's Bob Enton from the Maryland Bankers Association.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association. You know, we've looked at this legislation, we've discussed it. On behalf of the Maryland Bankers Association, the vast majority of the members of which are community banks in the communities in each one of your districts. You know, the large banks hold a high percentage of the deposits, but the number of banks that we have are 2/3 of our members are community banks that do business just in the state of Maryland or maybe across the state line. They are uniformly opposed to this bill. There's a reason why no state in the country other than North Dakota has formed a state bank, notwithstanding the studies. You know, there aren't any. What are we going to study? What are we going to look at? When I read the written testimony from the proponents, it talks about public banks, state banks. There are none. There's one, and it's in North Dakota, and that's it. And it was formed over 100 years ago when there were no banks in North Dakota. North Dakota has a population of 762,000 people. State of Maryland has a population of over 6 million people. We have over 100 financial institutions that serve the citizens of this state. From the just recently with the PPP lending, Maryland banks made over 81,000 PPP loans totaling $10 billion. And they were made by the smallest banks on the Eastern Shore in Southern Maryland and Western Maryland, and by our larger banks. They worked together and they made these loans. I would just call your attention. There's so much information about this. The state of Washington, a fairly liberal state on the West Coast, they did a study of the entire country and this issue and how many states had considered it, how many municipalities had considered it. And I'll quote what the Washington State Treasurer said. I formally support building upon Washington's existing structure of banking and do not support public banking because of the higher risk and lower return on investment compared to the current private banking system. I take my fiduciary responsibility seriously, serving on the board of public employee retirement accounts, as a guardian of Washington's local government investment funds and rainy day funds.
You're not
I have
gonna
a
be able to read
deep-rooted
the whole
interest.
thing,
So
Bob.
look, the treasurers of the state of Washington did a study, Massachusetts did a study, and once again, there's a reason why there are no other public banks. I would point out to you that the banks that hold the state of Maryland's funds and local government funds, those funds deposits are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. They are regulated by the Office of the
Okay.
Comptroller of the Currency.
You're
This is
telling the
just something
truth,
that, in our
but
opinion,
you
makes
run
no
out of
sense,
time,
Madam
Bob.
Chairman. Makes no
Are
sense.
there any questions for Mr. Hinton? All right, Senator Hayes and then Senator Vital.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, what are you afraid of? I don't understand. What are you afraid of? This is a task force to study on whether or not there's feasibility, right? I think we just heard that, competition is always good, right? What are you afraid of that a task force may find as a result?
But look, I don't know what a task force is going to find. If you read the language in the bill, okay, the language in the bill, I think, with all due respect to the sponsor, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for her, but the task force is not whether we should have a state bank. It's we're going to perform a general assessment of the state's current network of public and private financial resources for the purpose of identifying potential areas of state
Gotcha.
bank
So Bob,
focus.
I think
it's a totally one-sided deal.
Right, I hear you, Mr. And I don't want to waste the committee's time. We've all read the bill, right? So we know what the bill says. I guess the question is, what is the threat? I understand there's an amendment here from Economic Matters Committee that to add the Maryland Bankers Association. Was it not your testimony that you would want to be added to this task force?
No, our testimony was
when it was in the
opposition.
House.
Our testimony was in opposition to the bill.
How did the amendment to add the Maryland Bankers Association?
I think they thought that was the fair thing to do. We pointed out in our testimony as part of our opposition that no one from the banking industry was named, but we still were very strongly opposed
And
to
so,
the bill.
and to accommodate your request to have representation from the Bankers Association.
Yeah, 1 out of 17 people on this 17-member task force. Frankly, I'll be honest, we just don't think it's necessary. We think we have much more important things to address than the decision as to whether we would become the second bank in the country to have a public bank.
Okay.
I understand your testimony, and I understand, like, we don't know if a public bank will even work. I think North Dakota is one example, is maybe not sufficient enough. But I find it really, really strange that the testimony is to object to a task force, just a study to make us smarter and learn what the implications may be and how it may provide as a resource to the communities we serve. So it's just weird to me. I would love to find out more information about it. I think I respect the chair has of the opinion that 12 months may not be enough, and maybe we might need more time. But I think an opportunity for us all to be smarter about what implications it will have and what opportunities it may present should be and could be welcomed by the banking industry. And so I think your testimony is just a little disappointing that we wouldn't even explore it.
Okay.
That's all I had.
Senator,
Senator, I'm very sorry that you see it that way. We just think it's
wait a minute,
not
Bob. You're
necessary.
not being asked another question now, Senator Vital.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Renton, we talked about the Public Bank of North Dakota, and that's the same as a state bank. That is a state bank. Do I understand that?
Yeah, it's a state bank that was formed in 1919.
And that's the only one that you know of in the United States.
There is no other one in the entire United States. A couple states had them, and they ended up, Delaware had a state farm bank that was on the verge of failure, was purchased by a bank. Puerto Rico had a development bank which failed. This has been looked at by, I don't know, a dozen states, and no state has elected to go down this road.
Next question, can you get information for us on how many states have looked at it and made a decision not to create a state bank?
I'll get you the list, but I know quite a few. Massachusetts looked at it, the state of Washington looked at it. It's been this bill's been around since around 2008. Delegate Gutierrez put it in every year, almost every other year for 13 years.
I know that, Mr. Renton, and I'm trying to figure out why the state would want to compete with our local community banks that we already have that are struggling somewhat in the state because of low interest rates. So if you could gather that information for me, I'd appreciate it.
I'd be glad to, Senator.
Thank
All
you.
right. Okay, if that is the last question for this panel, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
All right, now we have a number of bills with sponsor only. And we're starting with House Bill 1004, Delegate Crosby.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, distinguished members of the committee. I'm Delegate Brian Crosby for the record, and it's an honor to present House Bill 1004 entitled Financial Institutions Commissioner of Financial Regulation, Credit Union Power. Members, you may remember this or recognize the language of this bill because last year we approved an identical version for which was sponsored by the Commissioner's Office for banks. And I do think that the Commissioner's Office would have done this bill had they not just been overwhelmed. And we look forward to providing you with a letter of support from them immediately following this hearing. They didn't get it in time to testify. As you know, credit unions in Maryland may be chartered and governed by either federal or state guidelines. These guidelines are mostly the same. Are some distinctions that result in longer wait times and therefore lower efficiency for the state chartered credit unions when attempting to engage in some areas of federally permissible activities, such as real estate lending. Currently, once a state chartered credit union submits an application to engage in these activities, there is no timeline for the commissioner to approve or deny the application. The bill does not remove any commissioner's power to deny applications, but allows credit unions to engage in the activities if the Commissioner's Office does not request further information, extend the review process, or deny the application within 45 days. The best example I can give is just think of it as like a pocket passage. So if we pass a bill here, the governor has 10 days to veto. He could sign it within those 10 days, or if he doesn't sign it, then it just becomes law after the time limit expires. Again, this is the same policy we approved for banks last year, and federally chartered credit unions already operate in this way. So we are just trying to standardize the field across each institution. For these reasons, I urge the committee to offer a favorable report on House Bill 1004, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, are there any questions? Okay, if not, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, we're going next to Delegate Lutke, House Bill 13.
Hi, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, thanks for having me today. Good to see all of you. House Bill 13 is a fairly straightforward bill. You can think of it as a union neutrality bill. What it does is it says that taxpayer dollars cannot be used either to promote or oppose a unionization effort by public employees and cannot be used either to promote or oppose the actual joining of a union by an individual. There are a number of clarifications and language in the bill, just to make clear that the normal course of labor management relations is perfectly fine, but that the taxpayer dollars should not be spent on these purposes.
Okay, are there any questions for Delegate Lutke? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're going next to Delegate Corman's bill. I understand that we took so long he had to leave and that his staff person will be testifying on his behalf.
I hung with you, Madam Chair. I did not want to.
Oh, you are here, okay.
To be before the committee and so many former delegates, which makes your committee quite impressive, as well as my former professor. I come before you today with HB 30, the Office of People's Counsel Environmental Reform Act. If you look at the third reader markup from the House, you'll see extensive changes. So just to press the fast forward button, this is a heavily revised and compromised piece of legislation that moved a number of parties from opposition to neutrality. Essentially what it does is it makes some reforms to the Office of People's Counsel consistent with your newly confirmed Office of People's Counsel, who you saw earlier today on a different bill, who you all previously confirmed unanimously, to strengthen his ability and that office's ability to speak up for environmental interest as part of the residential ratepayer interests that the OPC represents. It sort of clarifies what we mean by residential ratepayer interest, which is something that was not previously defined in Maryland very clearly. We looked at a number of other states and localities to figure out how their OPCs were structured to come up with our definition. It requires that there be an associate people's counsel focused on environmental issues. It expands what expertise the Office of People's Counsel is allowed to hire, to make it clear that they're allowed to include people who can bring some of that environmental expertise that they need. It adds the OPC, the Office of People's Counsel, to a few relevant state boards and commissions, the Commission on Climate Change, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Council, and it also gives the Office of People's Counsel the same proportional increase that your committee and the full Senate and the full House gave to the Public Service Commission last year. So as you know, the way both the Public Service Commission and the Office of People's Counsel are funded is through a fee on the regulated utilities. Last year, the Public Service Commission got an increase because of their increased workload, but the Office of People's Counsel did not get a commensurate increase. This corrects for that by giving them the commensurate increase. So as I said, this is supported by the new Office of People's Counsel. Public Service Commission and took a formal position, but given your interest in consulting other agencies, I will say they provided very useful feedback into the bill. And with that, I would ask for a favorable report, and of course, happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the delegate? Okay, I see none. So thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
We're going next to House Bill 207, Delegate Wilson. Nursing homes, resident change in condition, notification and consultation with physician. Delegate Wilson. All right, I'll tell you what, we'll move on and we'll come back. All right, Delegate Stein. Okay, House Bill 492.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. House Bill 492 is known as the two-man crew or two-person crew bill. It's a bill this committee has passed 4 times and the Senate has passed 3 times, 2016, 2018, and 2019. So since the committee is familiar with the bill, I'll just summarize arguments in favor and respond to some claims raised at the House bill hearing. This bill would require that each freight train in the state and sharing tracks with passenger and commuter rail trains have a minimum crew size of 2 persons. 10 states have also mandated 2-person crew, and legislation is pending in an additional 12 states. Now, freight trains frequently carry hazardous cargo, and today are approaching 2 miles in length, and that's why nearly every freight train in the US is operated by 2 crew members, a licensed conductor and engineer. And having a 2-person crew is particularly important when there is an emergency, such as at a grade crossing. A single crew member cannot assess an accident, secure the train, and notify all emergency responders. Only if there's a second crew member can that person get off the train, assess the situation, and address any life-threatening issues. In 2019, there were more than 2,000 grade crossing accidents in the US with 807 injuries and 293 deaths. And in addition to these types of accidents, there are plenty of freight train derailments. One of those happened last month on February 22nd, when a CSX train derailed in Cumberland. Another derailment happened last November 24th in Baltimore, when 21 rail cars derailed in a freight train accident. Fortunately, no one was killed or injured in either accident, probably because the trains had no hazardous materials. Now, 2 years ago, the legislature passed this bill with bipartisan support, but it was vetoed by the governor. So we're back asking for your support. This type of legislation is supported overwhelmingly in a poll that was taken in 2018, 86% support. And President Biden, in a video made before he became president, has said he supports a 2-person crew minimum requirement. But I'd also like to address MDOT's claims in House testimony that this bill would increase MARC's operating costs. MDOT said that 2 of MARC's 3 service lines run on tracks owned by freight rail operators, which will likely require MARC to pay for any cost they incur from this bill and or require MARC to operate its trains with additional crew. Now, as it turns out, the 2020 amendment to the MTA access agreement with CSX doesn't require MARC to pay for any costs they incur from the bill. What it says is that if this type of bill is enacted, the parties shall discuss impacts and costs and operations. That's it. And also, CSX's costs would not increase because it committed back in the 1990s to not changing crew size under the current collective bargaining agreement. And that provision should last at least through this decade. As a result, neither MTA's nor MPA's costs would increase. MTA also said that while the bill does not require two-person crews for passenger trains, MTA advises that CSX is likely to create an internal operational rule requiring all trains to have 2 engineers on both freight and passenger trains, which would increase costs for more train service. But during the bill hearing in the House, the delegate asked CSX point blank if it was their intention to create this kind of internal operational rule requiring all trains on their tracks to have 2 engineers, both freight and passenger, if this legislation passed. Their answer was no, they have no intention of making this change. Therefore, there is no fiscal effect to the state. And then one last point, during the House hearing, opponents claimed that state 2-man crew rules are preempted by a rule issued by the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, in 2019. Last month, the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit struck down the federal rule as, quote, arbitrary and capricious, taking particular note that the assertions by FRA that reducing the number of crew members to 1 person could improve safety, quote, did not withstand scrutiny and was lacking. So for all these reasons, I urge support for the bill and be happy to take any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Delegate Stein? Okay, seeing none, thanks so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
We'll go next to House Bill 1034, Delegate Cullison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to present House Bill 1034, Prescription Drug Affordability Board, Plan of Action, Repeal of Date. When we established the PDAB in 2019, we had very ambitious goals for them and hoped that we would have a report on their considerations of possibly using upper payment limits to our Legislative Policy Committee due to a number of factors in terms of getting the board up and running operationally, and then the impact of the pandemic. The board has not been able to complete that work. And so what they're asking is that we remove the date of July 1st, 2021 for such a report out of the current statute and give them the time to do the work. And I'm in touch with folks from the board fairly frequently, and they've promised me that they will have something to us early next year. So with that, I hope that you will look on this vote favorably. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Cullison? Okay, thank you very much for your.
Hey, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I see Delegate Wilson pop back in. I think we should, we went over him. He wasn't on the, I think we should probably.
Yeah, I see him, yes. Okay. Yeah, we had called you before you arrived, Delegate. Okay.
I apologize, Madam Chair. I had one of your committee members talking about puppy mills in my committee and would have been my subcommittee, so I was trapped. Asking him questions made it a lot longer, so that's my bad. I've learned a lesson. I apologize.
Okay.
Right. We feel your pain, Delegate Wilson.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you got nursing homes, resident change in condition, notification and consultation with physician.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Chair, colleagues, this is House Bill 207. I will promise you I'll be brief. This bill basically just alters the amount of time in which a nursing home has to notify family members or caregivers any alteration of treatment. In addition, it requires that they consult with their resident physician regarding a change of condition, adverse events, or outcome that would have unattended consequences, and especially a decision to transfer or discharge a resident from the nursing home. This is all done in a response to the COVID issues that we've had, especially in Charles County, where nursing homes have taken quite a beating, and there was a lot of issues with our seniors and the communication between that and the families. A lot of families didn't even know that their family members were diagnosed with COVID. So this is just done in an attempt to make sure we keep the caregivers involved. I would ask for your support on House Bill 207.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Wilson? Okay, thanks so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, we're going next to Delegate Lehman. House Bill 983.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is my first time testifying before the Finance Committee, so glad to be here.
Welcome.
So thank you. Good afternoon and good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Mary Lehman asking for your favorable report on House Bill 983. It requires nursing homes to allow compassionate care visits by designated family members or guardians during COVID-19 and future catastrophic health emergencies as declared by the governor. So this is a story about thousands of nursing home residents in Maryland and across the nation, really, who have been physically cut off from their family members and friends for the last year because of COVID. My own 88-year-old mom is one of those people. She's a resident of a nursing home in Montgomery County, and my family watched over the past year through a window as she became less and less interested and engaged, and more recently being diagnosed as clinically depressed. Window and Zoom visits with elderly people are just not as meaningful or beneficial as in-person visits. At the same time that we've been unable to talk to mom in person, look at family photos, or read our hometown newspaper, the Greenbelt News Review, and do crossword puzzles, the nursing home social activities and their programs have pretty much all been suspended. There's nothing for mom and other residents to look forward to. So my family recently requested a psychiatric evaluation of mom. The doctor confirmed she was clinically depressed as a result of social isolation specifically. He said she would not benefit from medication, but instead he ordered 3 to 4 one-hour visits a week by what is called a compassionate caregiver. Those visits began in February, and I can tell you they are definitely helping her. Now, we pay out of pocket for those. The problem is not every family can afford that. And my sisters and I have 4 sisters who live in the area. We talked about it and we said, you know, if an outside caregiver is permitted to come in and provide what essentially is emotional support to a nursing home resident, why can't a family member safely do the same thing? So that was the genesis of House Bill 983. And just briefly, what it does is instructs the Department of Health to develop visitation guidelines that would require a nursing home to allow visitation by a compassionate care visitor, restrict that visitor to the residence room or another designated room, and require each visitor to follow safety protocols such as COVID testing, temperature screening, and use of PPE. The guidelines do also establish procedures for designating 1 personal care visitor per resident, changing that personal care visitor if necessary, and establishing when visitation could be suspended. So I think this is a very carefully crafted bill. It addresses the devastating mental health effects of the isolation of nursing home residents that came about because of COVID. It also has safeguards to prevent the spread of COVID. And finally, it waives the liability for nursing homes if visitors do become infected. There was one amendment to the bill in HGO, which expanded it to cover future catastrophic health emergencies beyond COVID-19, because as we know, COVID-19 will eventually end and the restrictions with it will end. So it includes catastrophic health emergencies as declared by the governor, the same part of the public safety article where Governor Hogan is currently declaring this emergency. I really think that you probably have seen a couple of emails today that you may have found confusing because some members of the public are saying this bill would unnecessarily restrict nursing home visits. I hope I've explained it to you in a way that you understand it does the exact opposite. And it did pass the House unanimously, 135-0. I ask again for your favorable consideration, and I thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, if not, then we thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Now, colleagues on Senate. Okay, yeah. Okay. Delegate Guyton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Finance Committee. I'm so glad that you didn't forget me there. I am here, for the record, I'm Delegate Michelle Guyton from District 42B in Baltimore County, and I'm here to ask for your favorable report on House Bill 718. Don't tell the rest of the Senate, but you are in fact my favorite Senate committee because last year it was, yeah, right, Senator Hayes, because last year this was the committee that actually took House Bill 847, which is the state coordinator for autism strategy, across the finish line and into statute. So simply 718, which is what I'm presenting to you today, moves that position from the Department of Disabilities to the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. That was required by the governor's budget and requested by the budget secretary. So I'm asking for a favorable report for 718 so that we can finally get down to work, have the adequate funding to make a difference in the lives of people with autism and their families in Maryland. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Good job. No questions. And thanks so much for your testimony.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, colleagues in Senate Finance, we will assemble for a voting session at 3:50. So please be present at 3:50 sharp.